After a week off, the Orange and Black Insider is back in effect. I am Anthony Kazenz, and I am joined by Scott Schulte, my co-host. Scott, I want to thank you on air. I know, and my other co-host, Connor Howe, as well. My schedule's been all over the place, and you guys have had to kind of put things together, and we've had to kind of work on the fly a little bit. So I apologize for that. I hope you're doing well. I hope your family's doing well. I think you are getting set to move, right?
Yeah. So I think with when lives kind of happen, we shift things around, but it is fun to talk about it.
Well, they do treat us pretty well. Unfortunately, just life has just gotten in the way and all of that. But we are back, and I think tonight, even though it's not our usual Wednesday night, I think it's a good night to be back because it's on the first night of free agency. And after the first day of free agency, and obviously there's that little period before that where teams can kind of re-sign their players. There's a lot of emotions running high right now in amongst Bengals fans because of what has transpired in really the last 24 to 48 hours. News has come out now that on the negative side, they lost two starting offensive linemen and their two best linemen from last year, left tackle Andrew Whitworth, which was a little bit of a surprise, and right guard Kevin Zeitler, which kind of wasn't. We'll talk about details on that a little bit. Zeitler went to the Browns, which is a big bummer for Bengals fans. Whitworth went to the Rams, which, I mean, it's a bummer in itself, but at least the Bengals probably won't be facing him anytime soon. They did retain cornerback Dre Kirkpatrick, who was one of their big free agent priorities, if you will, and he got a 5-year deal. And Brandon LaFell, I believe, received something to the effect of a 2-year, $10 million deal, which on one hand, some people think that that's a little much for a guy like that, but he did play pretty well for the Bengals in their system last year. So, Scott, that's kind of the recap of the last 24 hours, what has happened with the Bengals, who they've lost. There's a lot to talk about here. We're going to also probably get some fan commentary. We are live on Cincy Jungle and on YouTube, so hopefully you're checking us out there. The Bengals said today, Scott, that they are, quote-unquote, concerned with the personnel losses that they have experienced. Obviously talking about Whitworth and Zeitler, and really last year they lost Marvin Jones, Mohamed Sanu, Reggie Nelson, a lot of guys over the past 2 years, and a lot of starters. How concerned are you? I mean, I would assume you're pretty concerned, but your overall impressions and your concern level after what's transpired just one day into free agency.
Well, I think Dennis Green said it best a decade ago when he said we are who they thought they were. And I think for fans, this really shouldn't be a huge surprise. I mean, the Bengals in free agency are who we thought they were, and we kind of see it happening here the first day. And if you look at for many teams what free agency is, it's a period where they look to improve. You're adding some people, you're losing some people. You know, you try not to lose too many people. You're going after those key needs. For the Bengals, it's never about improving. It's only about getting worse, but you're just trying to minimize how much you get worse because they don't really pursue new additions. They're just looking at, hey, let's keep some of the existing pet players, the ones we really like. We'll maybe pay them a little too much, but we're just trying to minimize the losses. And as you kind of highlight, the last couple of years, they've lost quite a bit. Last year's Reggie Nelson, Marvin Jones, Leon Hall, Wallace Gilberry, Andre Smith, Emmanuel Lemur, Mohamed Sanu. Lose all those guys, mostly starters. You add LaFell and Dansby. This year, as you mentioned, they've already lost Whitworth and Zeitler, who were the only two they're really good, but the only two good players in the offensive line, both gone. And so far they've added, essentially no one, unless you want to include the Josh Brown signing from a couple months ago, or John Brown, the backup kicker. Brown, yeah. But so you look at it and it's like, they just absolutely nothing. And so on one level, you obviously want to be concerned because you can't hemorrhage that much off a team, the team that, went to 5 straight playoffs. And as some people would obviously recognize, they're kind of hitting a window where with Geno Atkins, Carlos Dunlap, AJ Green, Andy Dalton, this is kind of their time. You're hitting your peak. You kind of have to do it now. And instead, they just kind of see all the pieces. They see everyone walk away. And they had it with coaches, too, all the coaches that left last year. So all the starters, all the coaches. And so you have to wonder, what exactly is happening with this team? And, the gut reaction is, well, we need to go out there and spend a lot of money, but you don't want to be stupid about it because we saw what the Texans just did. They had to give up a second-round pick, essentially, to dump Osweiler's contract. So on the one hand, you don't want to go to the one extreme and be silly, but they need to, I think, change the philosophy because every year it's the same thing where we're entering free agency knowing we're going to lose some people. Let's just try to minimize how much we lose. We try not to add anyone. We just do that in the draft. But when you do that, you're never really getting better. You're essentially trying to maintain. And so I think there's got to be some level of worry. And for the Bengals to even say it, I think was kind of surprising because usually they try to spin it as, we're keeping our own, but they just don't have a lot of their own to keep other than Drake Kirkpatrick. So I was actually happy to see him resign. I kind of figured him and Whitworth would stay. And the fact that Whitworth left, I think, was a huge kick in the pants.
Yeah, and I don't think they fully expected that. I think they kind of felt, whether you want to say hometown discount or loyalty to the team because they've paid him so much money over the years, whatever the case may be, I think a lot of people figured Andrew Whitworth would stay with the team. Now, I love your analogy of the quote-unquote maintain or there's so many ways to put it. Keep the status quo, don't rock the boat, let's not get too splashy, whatever the case may be. Now, I've been, and I'm going to try and not get too rantish about this here, but in terms of those who, I've worked for Cincy Jungle now since the spring of 2011. I've done a number of different interviews, a couple of different podcasts, that sort of thing, and talked about the Bengals a lot. Now, with all of the people I've worked with, I have been a bigger proponent of the Bengals being splashier in free agency than they normally are because, number one, that's just what teams kind of do. Now, do they fail? Yes. Have the Bengals failed in the past? Yes. That should not limit you to not be aggressive or not be proactive in free agency or not do anything really like, hey, that was kind of an unexpected thing. And in the first couple of days of free agency, and that's just what they do. And you would think in a year that they had a down year, they said this offseason they would be quote unquote things would be vastly different in 2017. They are not, and I've usually asked the question every year. How when free agency comes, how are you getting better? What are you doing right now that's making your team better? This year, I'm almost forced to ask the question: What are you doing to even be as good as a 6-win team from a year ago? I don't know. Now, Scott, I learned from a good friend of Cincy Jungle and other projects we've done. Jeff Hobson, he wrote an article today explaining the team's reasoning behind not keeping Zeitler. And a lot of people get mad at Hobson for some of the stuff he writes, and I guess I understand that, but you have to understand he works for the team, and he's got a little bit of a PR role to play there. He wrote today that the team didn't even offer Kevin Zeitler a contract. Does that surprise you?
Yeah, I don't see how you don't offer a guy who's, arguably one of the top guards in the NFL a contract. I get the team that the Bengals like to build from the outside in. They like to go after wide receivers, cornerbacks, tackles, and defensive ends. You kind of see that in the draft and with their focuses. But still, you have to offer him something. Even if you don't think you're going to get him, if you think that his market is $10 million plus and you don't want to give him any more than 7 or 8, and okay, they did just give Bowling $5 million kind of proactively before he was free agent. And I assume part of that was probably under the assumption that, hey, we are going to lose Zeitler. We don't want to pay for 2 guards. We'll get the cheaper one. But that being said, you would think you still have to offer the guy something, unless he just flat out said he didn't want to play here, or if he flat out said, hey, I'm expecting this amount, and the Bengals decided, yeah, we're just not players in that. But still, yeah, it is kind of a surprise. And even some of the comments that came out of the Whitworth camp a week ago, how he was starting to look elsewhere because the team didn't seem serious. Kind of makes you wonder if they even offered him a contract, and if they did, how much of a low ball were they giving him? With him, 3 years, 36. I don't think the Bengals would have come anywhere near that. Even though if you look at that deal, it's basically a 1 year. I mean, all of it's pretty much guaranteed the first year. So it's essentially a very pricey 1 year deal, which I think the Bengals could have done. I think the Bengals could have said, hey, we'll give you the same thing and just cut him after a year if the idea is just to keep him. But yeah, not giving Zeitler anything just seems kind of bizarre, especially after you just lost Whitworth. Chronologically, you've lost Whitworth. You want to have someone on the line who's played at some competent level.
Right. And now what's been done, and not only does Zeitler's team, or Zeitler leaving the team, weaken the Bengals, it strengthens a division rival, and one that that Mike Brown to this day cannot stand. He goes there, and then he also goes and plays for his old offensive coordinator. So that has to kind of speak volumes as well. Now, the Browns had a ton of salary cap money, much more than the Bengals have, but that's not really an excuse because the Bengals cap space sits somewhere between 43 and 45 million this year. And you would think that they would be able to keep every guy internally that they wanted while adding a couple of ancillary pieces as well. Yet that's just not how they operate. Scott,
going to the Browns. As I say, going to the Browns is kind of interesting, and I think several people have probably brought up the whole Eric Steinbach thing. But it's not just Steinbach. You look at it, Andrew Hawkins also went there. I mean, he was a guy we wanted to keep, and they threw a ton of money at him. Frosty Rucker, when he was finally becoming a competent backup, he went up there. It just seems that it's very one-directional. When's the last time we actually signed a free agent? I guess you could argue Dansby was up there, but it generally seems to be very one-sided, that they leave Cincinnati and head to Cleveland for whatever reason. Yeah,
and there are the other people I mentioned that are, and I respect their opinions, the analysts that say, you build through the draft, you only kind of do some things in free agency. Well, today alone, the New England Patriots, who are just coming off of yet another Super Bowl championship, it was announced that they signed cornerback Stephon Gilmore, who is one of the best on the market. They traded for tight end Dwayne Allen. They re-signed Alan Branch, and I think they're doing something to retain Jabal Sheard, if I remember correctly. So on day one already, they are doing a lot of things to improve their club. Now they're going to let Martellus Bennett walk, who was a big part of their thing, but they're getting Gronkowski back. So my point is even the best teams in the league are still doing some things in terms of adding outside talent to on these first days to make their team better. And I don't understand why the Bengals aren't at least a little bit more proactive about it. It frustrates me. I know there's a lot of people, both in our chat room and things I've seen on Twitter and on Cincy Jungle, people are frustrated. I get you. Let's talk about – did you have a comment, Scott? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I just want to say, you're talking about the free agents. I was trying to think off the top of my head, so I'm sure this isn't a total complete list, but looking at the big – you mentioned the big splashes earlier. Who are the big splashes the Bengals have made? Tank Johnson, Antoine Odom, Bobby Williams, Ben Utek, Terrell Owens, Lavernius Coles, Antonio Bryant, Manny Lawson, Carlos Dansby, Dahani Jones, Marshall Newhouse. As far as the guys they brought in during free agency. Not really a splashy group, and that's kind of spread over like 10 or 15 years. So it's not like, they're doing this every year. I mean, they're usually middle of the road, lower end. And to your point, yeah, you just can't keep operating that way and expect to keep winning.
Yeah, and especially it just becomes especially frustrating when they say, "Oh, we're concerned," and it's almost like you didn't even have something in place to do something about it in case these people, these players left. Now, there's a couple of things that we can talk about, Scott, and one of which is what happens now that in the past two off seasons, in the past calendar year, if you can believe it, the Bengals have lost 3 starting offensive linemen, whether it was by their own volition or not. Andre Smith, their starting right tackle. Andrew Whitworth, their starting left tackle. Kevin Zeitler, their starting right guard. They did re-sign Clint Bowling, I believe it was back in the 2015 offseason. Where are they? I mean, you see Jake Fisher and Cedric Ogbuehi 2 years in, and you're hoping they're improving. You're hoping they're getting their feet under them. Ogbuehi was a disaster at right tackle last year. I don't know how he's going to go up against some other premier pass rushers on the other side if he's expected to play right tackle, if he's supposed to be the right guard. Jake Fisher hasn't been much better himself. So number one, I guess I got to ask you, do you have faith in these guys in year 3, that critical developmental year, that they're going to come in and be suitable starters? Or do the Bengals now need to scour the waiver wire, the free agency wire again, and maybe get an Andre Smith on a short-term cheaper deal? Some other guys that might be floating out there. What do you think?
Yeah, you're looking at what they're. You have to hope when they use those 2 picks in Ogbuehi and Fisher, and you have to. I mean, obviously, at this point, they have no choice. They have to play them, and even if Whitworth hadn't gone, the idea is at some point you drafted them, play the guys. They haven't shown much yet, and you have to have kind of that foolish optimism as a fan that they'll just magically get better. And unfortunately, with Ogbuehi, it probably never. I mean, it probably won't happen because you look at. Okay, he led the SEC in sacks allowed. He gave up 7 sacks his last year. He got benched, demoted from left tackle temporarily. His big complaint on him was core strength. Biggest issue is still core strength. So either he's not hitting the weight room, or I don't know what it is. For whatever reason, they're just you don't see a lot of upside. And so someone might say, well, you can swing him into guard, but you can only have so many guards. You still have to have a tackle. I mean, you still have to have someone to play on the outside. So I think at this point, if you're a Bengals fan, you just have to assume Fisher and Ogbuehi are going to do enough not to get Dalton killed. But I think realistically, they have to look at kind of like a Marshall Newhouse type, someone that they're not going to get on day 1 or 2 because they're not going to overpay, but someone who is an adequate, halfway decent person, someone who can come in, maybe has been a backup elsewhere, maybe low-end starter, an older veteran, which is probably we're going to see. We're probably going to see him bring in someone like that when they brought in a guy like Eric Winston a few years ago. He did a serviceable job. It's probably going to be a signing of that sort. Nothing that's going to give Bengals fans a lot of optimism. But I don't know what else they do. And I mean, you could personally, I'm a big fan in Trey Hopkins. I'd like to see Trey Hopkins get a chance, or Christian Westerman. So you figure, okay, maybe you have something there, but you just can't say we're going to hang our hat on unproven young players and other young players who have played and have struggled and just hope for the best. Because otherwise, if you do that, you're pretty much just signing up for the fact that Dalton's going to have a green jersey the entire game.
Yeah, and it's a fine line to walk. I mean, unfortunately, it's kind of the life of a Bengals fan of, if you're a Bengals coach, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, where, you're not playing the young guys enough. And, there's guys that are on the bench that could be better. And then sometimes they do play them, they don't play well, and then they let good players walk out the door, and you complain about that. So, I mean, but I think there's still viable complaints here. I do like that you mentioned Westerman. Slip Ammo in our YouTube chat said he thinks, in so many words, he thinks Westerman might be the right guard coming into this year. If you remember, some draft nicks had him as a second-round type of talent, and he fell to the Bengals all the way to the 5th last year. Didn't play a snap even when the season was lost. They didn't get him out there, so I'm interested to see that. You've also got Russell Bodine, who has had his ups and downs in his career in the middle. I think if you're a Bengals fan, you might be pretty upset about how things went on the first day of free agency. But if you're going to ask who the most upset person probably is on a day like this, it's probably got to be Andy Dalton. He loses his 2 best linemen, and I can't imagine what's going through his head, though he would never say anything negative about really anybody. So in terms of this impacting the draft, Scott, we talked about the Bengals have 11 picks, including the compensatory picks that they received. And the compensatory pick thing might have played into their logic in letting the two high-profile linemen go. I don't really think it's a good idea to maybe get a end of a fourth-round pick for somebody like Kevin Zeitler, but I mean, it is what it is. But aside from that, we kind of had some thoughts. How are they really going to add 11 new people to this roster? Maybe they package the picks, trade up, that sort of thing. Now with these personnel losses, do you think that they end up using all of those picks and maybe some high ones on linemen, even though they did that just 2 years ago on Fisher and Abuehi?
Interesting. 2 weeks ago, we talked about how they're not going to be able to use all 11 picks because they don't have the roster space. But, after, 5 hours of free agency now, at least it's heading that way, and they're probably going to have a little more space when it's all said and done. If you guess that Burkhead might be gone, you kind of hope Pecco might finally be gone. So, all of a sudden you're going from no spots to 2 spots. Might have 3, 4, 5 by the end of the day or end of the week. They don't seem to be a team that tends to trade up. I think a week ago we probably could have made a good argument that, hey, they could trade up, maybe move that number 9 up to a 1 or 2, or move up into the top of the second round. I think at this point, if anything, they might possibly trade down just because they do need offensive linemen, and there's really no one this year who seems to be a number 9 overall guy. So you could be looking at the tackle from Wisconsin or the left tackle from Alabama. Those could be possibilities, and a lot of people seem to have them in that 15 to 25 kind of range, which is about where they got Zeitler. I think he was 28 or 25 years ago. So if they're looking at replacement, and you never know if they may give someone like Westerman or Hopkins a chance, and then if they see something different, we don't. And I think this is definitely going to be a year where we just have to fish or cut bait with someone like Paul Alexander, because they just haven't really done a good job at developing offensive linemen. I mean, we've seen Bodine, who they traded up for, struggle mightily. We've seen the 2 tackles of Abuehi and Fisher have struggled mightily. You look at the guys they've drafted after round 4, no one's ever developed into a starter. The only people who have done anything have been very high picks. Zeitler, who was the top guard drafted that year, I guess after him and DeCastro, and then Andre Smith was taken number 6 overall. So you hope he's fairly decent. But outside of that, and you have to go all the way back to Andrew Whitworth to find someone they've drafted who became a good quality offensive lineman. And I mean, we can keep throwing picks at the position, but at some point he just needs, I don't know if they're picking the wrong people or he just doesn't have the ability to turn them into NFL players. Except for the ones who are so good that you just can't screw up. That me or you could walk out there and coach. So I have to think they're going to use at least 1 pick, if not 2. But then they have to play the guy, and that's the other thing. Is like you mentioned, you not putting the guys in at the end of the year when the game just didn't really mean a whole lot for whatever reason. Don't seem to do that. I mean, we saw that with them refusing to play Jackson III. I mean, or even Drake Kirkpatrick, who they just signed. They sat him on the bench for 2 or 3 years before he got in. So you think even if they do use a high pick, is the guy even going to get on the field?
Yep, and that goes back to that weird dichotomy I talked about earlier with this team and how they use their draft picks and their high picks. I just want to say this. I know there's a lot of other things we can touch on with this, and we probably will continue to, not only in this show, but in the weeks ahead, based on what the team does or doesn't do. I'm just going to kind of say this. One thing that struck me today is and again, I don't like to point fingers and single anybody out, but the Bengals allowed a long-time Pro Bowl productive player, locker room glue kind of guy in Andrew Whitworth walk away. Now, maybe they didn't offer the same money or whatever, but they allowed him to walk away. And Adam Jones, who just had an off-field incident this offseason, is still on the roster at this point. that to me, aside from seeing good players go, the decision-making process there, I really question. I don't know about you, Scott, but I really question that.
Yeah, I have to agree, especially because what is the one thing you usually hear about the Bengals about holding on to these veterans too long is that whole locker room presence thing. Oh, he's a good teammate. He's a good locker room guy. We can't get rid of him. Robert Gathers, Chris Crocker, Andrew Whitworth types. We're going to keep them forever. We're going to keep them until they're too old to play football because they're just great people. And like you said, now you're letting those guys go. What is this team doing? And I don't know if they have a direction. Maybe I was one of the complaints with them seeing the guys go is that I don't know if they are just being caught off guard, if they maybe thought they were going to keep some of these guys and they didn't stay. I'm not sure. Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder what's happening when you see the guys who they're letting go. And then, like you said, how they're holding on to Adam Jones. And, I mean, you can kind of hope with Drake Kirkpatrick locked up for 5 years, maybe Jones is gone, but I'd say at this point it's probably 50-50 that he will be on the roster come September 1st.
Yep. Those are our initial thoughts to the first day of free agency and the early stages of free agency, Bengals fans. We've got a lot of viewers, the most we've had watching this live episode, so we are stoked on that. And we're, again, live every time we do the show, live on Cincy Jungle and live on our YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can subscribe to our SoundCloud channel. We're also on Twitter at BengalsOBI. You can follow us there. I think I said we're on iTunes. If not, we are on iTunes. And you can also get in touch with us via email, theobinsider@gmail.com, with any questions or comments. We are going to try and fit in fan questions, fan comments towards the end of this show. So for all of the viewers and everybody watching live in the YouTube chat or in the Cincy Jungle comment threads, please leave those there. We are monitoring those and taking a look at those, as well as our Twitter account. Checking that stuff out. So thank you so much for your support and for downloading all of our content. Scott, the draft and the Adam Jones conversation is a good segue to what our next segment's going to be about. And we're going to try and get away a little bit from the negativity of free agency and the cynicism that goes with losing good quality players there, and talk a little bit about the combine and some players who have kind of been connected with the Bengals, whether it's in the first round or third round or whatever. Definitely we've answered a lot of questions about these two specific players we're going to talk about at the combine. I didn't get to watch a ton of the combine, admittedly. I saw a little bit. Obviously saw a guy I really like, John Ross, break the 40-yard dash time. I know you're not a big 40-yard dash guy, but of course,
he was wearing the wrong shoe.
Yeah. So, let's start with just your kind of. Did you have any handful of players that impressed you from the combine?
Well, the one thing I thought was interesting was that, from what I recall, I don't think Corey Davis or Mike Williams ran. Did they?
I know Mike Williams did not. I don't know about Corey Davis.
And I thought that was kind of Corey Davis. I'm the athletic version of Mike Williams. I may not make the cool catches, but I'm the big athletic guy. But the one thing that kind of surprised me was I was expecting at least one of the quarterbacks to emerge after teams got a chance to see them in person and kind of watch them. And maybe that'll be more in the pro days because since the Bengals aren't in a quarterback market and they're picking high, the one of the best things you can have is teams ahead of you trying to get quarterbacks, because that pushes the better position players down to you. So when you've got, 2 or 3 of the top 8 teams picking quarterbacks, then you're getting that better defensive lineman, linebacker, say, whoever. Well, this year, if no one's taken a quarterback in the top 8 or 9 picks, you don't have as much to pick from. And then depending on what they do, and if we look at, once free agency, the dust kind of settles and we kind of see where they're at in the end of April, this looking at the prospects and what the needs are, there may not be anyone worth taking at number 9. And so it might be in their best interest to trade down. And usually the best way to trade down is having a team who wants to trade up. And generally they'll trade up because more often than not because they want a quarterback. And so that was probably the one disappointing thing, was that at least so far, none of these quarterbacks have stepped up and kind of become, that guy that, hey, we're all fighting for this person. We all want to, get up in the top 10. And if we don't get Watson, we want Kaiser or Trubisky or whoever. So that was probably one of the disappointing things, was to see no one really emerged. The other disappointing thing was kind of disappointing because he's been tied to Bengals, has been the whole Reuben Foster incident, where he was a popular mock pick. And now the question is, he may not even go in the top 15 picks. Maybe now, would he fall to the end of round 1 or further? And granted, it's a one-time incident, but still it kind of makes you wonder what is up with this kid, that you come to the combine and it's your, the most important job interview you're ever going to have in this field, and you decide to get in an argument and you get kicked out.
Yeah. And that's where I was going next. Here's the thing with that. I'm with you. I'm totally with you about, like, this is a thing you can't, granted there's maturity issues from all these kids who probably range from 20 to 24 years old that are competing in this, in this environment, but you can't show up and fail a drug test. You can't show up and bail out of the thing halfway through, unless you injure yourself while performing or something like that. That's kind of understandable, I suppose. And you can't show up and be a knucklehead, whether it's in the interviews or something that Foster did. And for those of you who may not know, Reuben Foster, who's the consensus top linebacker out of Alabama, top linebacker in this draft, was really gotten into a very heated argument with some sort of nurse or medical assistant while going through, I don't know if it was a check or something like that, but he does have, I think, Scott, he had a shoulder scope or something like that, which was a little bit of a red flag. And then this happens, and the NFL excused him. Now, maybe they pulled the trigger a little too quickly. Maybe the incident was overblown, but you look at it and you go, what are you thinking? I mean, what's going through your head here? And we don't know the whole story, but like you said, Scott, you got to know better. Now, the one thing when it comes to the Bengals and exceptions with this, aside from Adam Jones and things like that, if you remember back in 2009, after all of the red flags and weird behavior from Andre Smith, the Bengals still stuck to their board and took Andre Smith despite all the weird combine. Remember, he ended up leaving the combine, and then he did that shirtless run where he looked completely out of shape at his pro day, and they still grabbed him there. Might the shoulder thing and this recent run-in with Foster, might that just not even be enough for the Bengals? If he's their guy at 9, might it not be enough? I don't know.
I think if he's their guy, he's their guy. I think a lot of it, too, will probably depend on the pro day. Yeah, the Andre Smith thing was kind of interesting, although at the time, that, from what I recall, that wasn't really a great draft, and there really weren't a whole lot of better people. I think maybe Clay Matthews in that draft, but outside of that, there just wasn't much to be had. So I kind of, in hindsight, at the time, it was kind of silly. I think a lot of fans were like, what in the hell? The guy who, is famous for leaving the combine and running with no shirt, and, the big bouncing, this kind of where you want to turn away, think where you want to look but don't want to look at the same time.
Morbid curiosity. Yeah.
And, of course, it's a 40-yard dash, which is kind of funny because I personally think the 40-yard dash is about as useless as Yahoo News. So, like you said earlier, I'm not a big fan of the 40-yard. Like if you're a running back, to me, I think the 3-cone drill is a lot more interesting. But it was interesting because another guy tied to the Bengals has been the running back from LSU, Leonard Fournette, who I think I've probably mentioned on this podcast. I'm not a huge fan of at number 9. He's a good enough player. Unfortunately, he doesn't seem to have a lot of ability to make people miss. He tends to be more of a power guy with some good speed if he gets a big hole, and that's just not – okay, you've lost Zeitler and Whitworth. That's not the Bengals. But it was interesting. He comes in, another combine thing. He comes in 10 pounds overweight, and he claims it's water weight. maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But if it's, if you're going to the combine, like we talked about, this is your big interview, you probably can control that to a degree. You kind of know your diet. You have these professional people your agents have hired for you who are doing this stuff. You're going to the specialized fitness gym places to really get, to become workout warriors and everything. You're not going to show up 10 pounds heavy with water, if it is water. That's just something you're not going to. So I don't know. It just, the combine's interesting. I think it has its value. I think sometimes teams, players, and fans and coaches can obviously blow it out of proportion and make it more than it should be. I mean, it should be something where, it's kind of like that. Okay, we have 2 or 3 guys we're pretty close on, or we've seen some stuff in the game film, and we want to see, why is this happening? Guy throws interceptions. We want to see, does he seem like a jerk? He doesn't grasp things. Is it because he has small hands and he can't hold the ball? Is it because, maybe he has a bum shoulder or a bad motion? And you can kind of see those things. But I think too often we try to put too much on the numbers. And this guy ran a 4.39, this guy ran a 4.42. Obviously, the 4.39 is a better guy.
Yeah. And Fournette had a very weird combine. Very weird combine. He did very poor in the vertical jump, which a lot of people attribute to athleticism, explosiveness, that sort of thing. But showing up 10 pounds heavy with quote unquote water weight, he still ran a 4.51, which for his size is it's pretty fast, right? I mean, and I know none of us really take too much stock in that, but I mean, straight line speed for a guy his size, that's fast. So I don't know. And for those who don't know, there was a report, I believe, earlier in the week that it was from NFL Network reporter Didi Kinkabwala, who covers a lot of the AFC North teams. She said that the Bengals are heavily interested at Leonard Fournette at number 9 from what she's heard, and that he would be their guy. I don't know how, things change. I don't know how believable that is, but that's what she reported recently on the Fournette front. Speaking of running backs and some issues that go along with that, Scott, we have to talk about this guy yet again. And I kind of, on one hand, don't like to give this guy publicity because of his past issue, but he's a high-profile guy. He's a high-potential guy with a lot of baggage in terms of off-field stuff. The Bengals were one of, I believe, 4 teams that showed up to Joe Mixon's Oklahoma Pro Day. And for those, again, we'll just kind of lightly recap. Joe Mixon was seen on camera back in 2014 punching a young woman in the face at a cafe that was, I think, on campus or near campus, and was suspended for a year. And then he had another little run-in with a parking attendant. So this guy appears to be a hothead, to say the least. And, there's differing opinions, especially when it comes to, now the Bengals are facing a lot of good player attrition. Do they take these chances on troubled guys that can really maybe bridge them even for 2 years or something like that? But they were there, and Mixon ran a lot faster than I think people thought. You told me before we took the air, Scott, I think it was 4.37 and 4.41. We can double check that. But your thoughts on the Bengals being there? Does that signal that they are heavily interested in this guy? I mean, it gives the impression they are, but I like this. I mean,
only because, and I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago. I personally think he's the top running back in the draft as far as pure talent. I'd put him number 1, maybe Dalvin Cook 1B, and then Fournette maybe a clear number 2 or 3. That being said, I think he is going to drop because obviously the whole thing with the red flags, the one primary red flag. And a week ago, we were talking about this guy as a 4th, 5th round, possibly even an undrafted free agent, a guy who's not on some teams' boards.
Yep.
He goes and runs, under sub 4.4, and now all of a sudden people are like, ooh, we want this guy. Or at least the buzz is they want this guy. And so I was disappointed he ran that fast, only because I was kind of hopeful he's someone that the Bengals could, possibly grab in the middle, late rounds, kind of sneak up and, while teams are passing up on him. That obviously isn't going to happen now, just because, even though I think the 40-yard dash is overblown, when you run that fast, someone's going to grab you.
Yeah.
But it was interesting the Bengals were there, because you look at the Bengals running back position, and we kind of addressed it a few weeks ago, but Jeremy Hill has struggled mightily last couple of years. He's not the fastest guy, isn't the greatest at making people miss, can't really create, needs lanes, doesn't get lanes, doesn't really have the best division, is good at those 1 yard.
And now it's going to be harder, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there was nothing today that made Jeremy Hill's production any better.
Yeah.
And you have Giovanni Bernard coming off the injury, so you don't know what you're getting with him. Burkhead is probably going to be gone, although there's been no buzz, but I'd be surprised if he stays around. So you're looking at, they've got to get someone. Joe Mixon would fix that as long as he doesn't get suspended, and he's someone that you can you can rely on, that's going to be playing the whole season. But it's one of those things where it's like, it's the anti-Tim Tebow. I mean, okay, Tim Tebow is a guy you'd probably want dating your daughter, may not be the guy you want as a quarterback on your team. Joe Mixon's probably the opposite. He's the guy you don't want dating your daughter, but is definitely a much better football player. So I think if you're convinced he's past those issues, if you're convinced it's a one-time, and we don't know all the details. I mean, obviously, there's not really an excuse for what he did, but half the time, in these situations there, it's not just like he just randomly picks someone. Oh, I'm going to, walk up, bam, and head. We don't know what was going on. There was no audio with the video, so we don't really know what really transpired. Either way, it's pretty bad. I mean, it shades of Ray Rice again, and that's obviously not a good situation. But if you can get past that aspect, it's really hard not to look at this guy as an awesome running back.
And what makes him that is not only the speed and the rushing yards and yards per carry average he had at Oklahoma throughout his couple of years there, but his versatility. He can catch the ball and take a pass a long way. He's I think I don't have it in front of me, but I think we mentioned on the show before he's had some big returns, and I think even a touchdown. So he's got some versatility that, Giovanni Bernard has that, but they don't really ever use him as a kick returner. They kind of dabbled with it a little bit a couple years ago. Never came to fruition. Rex Burkhead, not a return man, can catch and can run and do those sorts of things. But the thing is if you're going to and maybe the Bengals, based on Aditi Kikampuala's report of Leonard Fournette being their guy, maybe the fact that they were one of the few teams at Joe Mixon's pro day shows that they are interested in him. If that's the case, then they need to reinvest heavily in their offensive line, because their offensive line not only was very poor at protecting the passer last year, they did not consistently open up holes for running backs, and now you lose your two best guys who were best at both of those things, and that doesn't bode well for things. So still interesting that the Bengals have been connected to those two guys, and there's obviously some issues behind them. Mixon, for those who don't know, was not invited to the Combine because of these issues. And some people felt, I kind of want to end this segment with this question to you, Scott. Some people felt he at least should have been given the chance to show up and talk to teams and explain his situation, at least give teams a little bit of a grasp on who he is in person. Do you think he should have been afforded that chance, or do you think he forfeited that based on his past behavior?
Yeah, I think he should have been there only because of the Combine. The whole purpose of it is they're bringing in players who teams are interested in drafting. And so to the teams to say, hey, we want you guys, please show up so we can all check you out. We can all look at the same time, get the same measurements, the same, whatever, same chance to interview you, so forth. So in that regard, I think he should have been there because teams are interested in him. But instead, they kept him from going, and it was almost like the NFL is punishing him, almost like we're treating the Combine not so much as a service to the teams, but it's more like a reward to the player. So by not bringing you, we're saying it's a punishment to you, which, okay, you can say it, but the whole purpose is supposed to be a service for the teams. And now the teams have to go, either go see him or bring him in, and you only get so many visits, and now you have to make a special visit, either bring him to your location or to go out there and chat with him while you're also checking out other people. It's almost it seems almost like an overreaction to some of the domestic legal things that have happened in the league, that they just want to put on a good face and say, hey, look, we're doing the right thing because we're going to hinder teams, and somehow that's going to make us look better as a league.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. I think if you don't want them to perform physically on the field, at least maybe give them a chance to talk to some teams and talk to some people. And I don't know. I even though he may be, for lack of better words, a knucklehead or a jerk or whatever you want to call him, he may have, if he's trying to earn a livelihood here, he should have been able maybe to speak to some teams and at least clarify the situation and at least get the grasp of, hey, this guy he's not a good guy. If he shows up and he maybe has a blow up like Reuben Foster or something, then you go, okay, this is obviously a pattern of behavior. Or if he's contrite and this is something that was 2.5 years ago in his past, and I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting little situation there. If you have thoughts about the Combine or draft prospects, we've already got some. We're going to try to address some of these fan questions towards the end of the show, and we're getting there. But if you have other thoughts on prospects, what have you, you can check out our show, again, live every week, Cincy Jungle. Leave them in the comment thread. YouTube, leave those in the comment thread. Leave them in the comments in our YouTube channel, our SoundCloud channel, on Twitter at BengalsOBI, via email, the obinsider@gmail.com, and then also on iTunes. We're on all of those, and then all of our materials also posted both as a whole and in snippets on Cincy Jungle. So check that out. Check out all the content that all of the great writers, including I don't want to say I'm a great writer, Scott, because that sounds a little egotistical, but you're a great writer, including Scott and I. We put up some stuff on there, and it's especially now that things are ramping up with the new NFL year, there's a lot more to look at on that website and in this podcast. So thank you for your support there once again. Scott, I want to tread a little lightly here just because, not everybody celebrates certain holidays, or, you got to kind of be a little sensitive to that. But I did like your idea of Ash Wednesday, and you seem to be quite the historian on the saints of the Catholic Church and all of that. You've mentioned a couple little things, and I was also a history poli-sci major in college, so I have a historical slant as well. But you kind of said, what should the Bengals, either as an organization or how they operate, players, whatever, what should they give up for Lent in this season of Lent? And I thought that was a really clever idea. What do you think? I'm gonna put you on the spot since this was kind of your idea here. What do you think about some things that the Bengals might need to give up for Lent?
Well, I just thought I'd be the idea man and you'd be the substance.
You're probably both, brother. I'm just kind of here,
Well, I'm almost disappointed now that we didn't do the podcast last Wednesday, which was Ash Wednesday, because I was really hoping to be, Cincy Jungle's Tony Reale and, have my little ashes up here. Unfortunately, they don't last a week, so they have since washed off. Yeah. I guess I could have, made some real quick before the podcast, but I didn't. Maybe we'll just Photoshop some in. But yeah, I think I'll start. The one thing I gave up for Lent. Well, the one thing I gave up for Lent, Bengals oriented, was the Combine. I did not watch any of the Combine, and the reason I didn't is every year we go through the Combine, and I think the game tape is where it is. I think the Combine is it's a nice little piece, but I think the video, what the guys can run. I care how fast he can run, in a game situation. It's more important, your reaction speed and getting to the ball carrier as a linebacker, not just, run well straight. Like Aaron Curry, when he was taken in the top 5 by the Seahawks years ago, he ran straight very well. Problem was he didn't diagnose plays he didn't run to the ball carrier and tackle the ball carrier.
Yep.
But he was good at running fast.
Vernon Golston, if you remember that guy, he's another one.
Now he was actually decent. I don't know whatever happened to him because he was actually solid at Ohio State, at least for. But anyway, yeah. So as far as giving stuff up, that'd be, I'd say, the one thing football. Now the thing I think the Bengals should give up, and it kind of goes. And some of this was thought before the defections we've seen today with Whitworth and Zeitler. Is I'd like to see them give up for Lent their free agency strategy, which, as we talked about kind of at the top of the show, was the whole idea of we're going into free agency looking at being worse than afterwards, but we want to minimize how much that worseness is. I'd like to see them actually look at getting better. And I know worseness isn't a word, but that being said, I'd like to see them, approach free agency with the idea of, hey, we want to get better. We want to enter the draft stronger than we were at the end of the season.
Yeah.
And in theory, that's kind of what it should be. You want to use free agency to, what are some glaring holes, some things you really need to fill, so when the draft comes, you can basically pursue the best players. You can see who falls to you. You can trade up and down. You can kind of go after what you want to. But if you just sit there in free agency and watch people walk away, you enter the draft, like you said, you go from few needs to many needs, because now you need left tackle, you need a right guard, still needing some of the things that needed before the free agency period. And even with Brandon LaFell, you can still argue they need another wide receiver, because he's probably not the answer unless you're convinced he is the next Marvin Jones, which a lot of Bengals fans argue he's not, and a lot of our comments on Cincy Jungle would agree with that. So I think that's the biggest thing I think the Bengals need to give up, is, at least for Lent, is their free agency. And it's kind of, since Marvin's been there, and even before that, it's sit by, we'll let people sign A1 because we want compensatory picks. You look at what they do with the compensatory picks, and it's, a bunch of guys that don't make the roster. And so you never get better. You just kind of try to minimize how worse you get and just hope you nail the draft. And when you do, it's great. But when you don't nail the draft, then you're keeping yourself from ever getting better than you are now. When you're 6-9-1 or whatever, not getting better from that isn't a very encouraging thing, unless you're trying to do what the Browns did last year and tank intentionally because you want a high pick. And I don't think you're doing that, because you have a lot of guys in their prime and you want to try to win now. So, yeah, I'd say that's the one thing I think the Bengals should give up for Lent.
I like it. And the reason I like it is because that's where I was going to go. So I'm going to try and get creative now. And I'm going to say the Bengals should – now it's too late to give this up now, but maybe their Lent is more of a 2018 resolution, and they should give up on Marvin Lewis. And I've been on record. I like Marvin Lewis. I don't love him. I think he's more of a Marty Schottenheimer, build a team up from the ashes, get him competitive, never gets them to the big game. He's proven to be that guy. And I just think that he and this coaching staff have not done a lot of their big players favors, aside from getting them some big contracts. And I think a lot of great players over the past, from 2003 to currently, have wasted a lot of years on one and done seasons, on non-playoff seasons. And you mentioned, we've got these players in their prime. Well, Scott, you look at their best players now, right? You would argue Geno Atkins, Andy Dalton, AJ Green, Whitworth's gone now.
Eifert, perfect.
Carlos Dunlap. These guys are now, they're not 25, 26 years old where this is a young, exciting new team now. These are guys that are at the tail end of their prime. And, you got AJ Green, who was injured last year, and granted that was kind of an aberration, but, I think this window has been wasted, and I think they did a great job rebuilding this team after getting rid of the malcontents of Palmer and Johnson and what have you in 2010, and they really struck gold. But It's also been wasted a bit. So I will say Marvin Jones. And I want to say this, Scott. There was a one-upper on me, which I thought was a great answer to this question. At least I'm assuming it's an answer to this question. Greg L. in our YouTube chat room. What the Bengals should give up for Lent is Mike Brown. I thought that was fantastic. I thought that was fantastic. Any additional thoughts on this, Scott?
Well, I think the only way that happens is if it goes to Katie Blackburn. So,
and it's still in the family. So yeah, there you go. Anyways, that was a fun little segment. We like talking about it. Good idea, Scott. I thought it was fun, and I actually like that you said what you gave up for Lent as a Bengals fan. I unfortunately I don't think I've given anything up yet per se as a Bengals fan, but I'll have to think about that. Maybe I'll figure out something.
I will point out for the next 40 days, I probably won't be bringing up Dairy Queen Blizzards on our podcast.
Probably not. Let's get to a couple fan questions and then get out of here, Scott, if that's okay.
Okay.
There's one that was both a topic on Cincy Jungle and it was readdressed in the YouTube chat. There's been a lot of comments, so I'm trying to scroll back to see who it was, but it has to do with the possibility of a trade with the Jets, A.J. McCarron, maybe throwing in Sheldon Richardson. Obviously, there's been a lot of friction with Sheldon Richardson and the Jets. I think he's had a couple of off-field issues as well, but very talented defensive lineman. The Bengals don't have Domata Peko under contract anymore, even though Sheldon Richardson isn't necessarily a defensive tackle. He's a 3-4 defensive end. So couple of questions here, especially now that the team has lost talented players in free agency, and based on their lack of visits and whatever their plan is going forward, getting picks for a guy that may have value that doesn't really have value to the current team he's on, aside from being a backup. Would you explore this trade? And would Sheldon Richardson, if he might be involved in that trade, would he be someone that you would like, even though you have Andrew Billings coming back? And like I said, I'm trying to look up here to see. Richardson was fined and was suspended for the first 4 games of the 2015 regular season for failing the substance abuse policy. So there's a couple little things in his background, but I don't know. What do you think?
I think on the surface, I like it because, and when I first saw the idea posted by the New York media, I thought, that'd be really cool because I want to get something from McCarron. You look at the money that Osweiler got last year, the money that Glennon's going to get. Yeah, a backup quarterback is who teams perceive as being decent is going to get some money. Garoppolo, if he ever gets traded, he's probably going to get paid. And part of the reason is because everyone wants a starter and not everyone has a starter. So you're going to trade for one, which basically means McCarron's gone after this year. The Bengals can say what they want. Yeah, we'd like to have him long-term and keep him. Well, he's not going to stay just to be a backup. And you're not going to pay a guy, $16 million or whatever to be a backup. And at that point, someone's going to be desperate enough to give money. So he's gone at the end of the year. So you want to get something for him. And I don't know what the trade market is for him. If we can get draft picks, players, depends on who all is calling us. It probably depends on what shakes out with guys like Tony Romo and Jay Cutler and Glennon. So to see who's left. But if the Jets happen to be the one team left and they're offering Richardson for him, or you sit him and you watch him go, on the surface, I like the idea because here's a guy, he was a high first-round pick, defensive player of the year, rookie year, Pro Bowler the next year. But then, all heck just seemed to break loose. They have a couple other guys on the defensive line who seem to be better, and he's just kind of fallen more into the he's still starting, but not getting the same kind of reps or snaps, and he fell down to only 1.5 sacks last year. You mentioned he was suspended last year, 4 games. He was suspended the year before. He has locker room issues, got into some sort of fight with Brandon Marshall for some reason over Twitter. People don't seem to like him on the team. He was benched for a game because of chronic tardiness. So he doesn't really seem like the kind of guy you would want in the locker room. So I think considering all that, I probably would not make the trade, only because I don't mind he's a 1-year deal because McCarron's going after the year, but he seems to be more baggage than he's worth, and I think I'd pursue picks. But if we can get something from McCarron, I would jump on it. And some people would say, well, it's kind of silly because if Dalton goes down, you want to have that backup. But honestly, I think if Dalton goes down, you're not going to the playoffs. You're not winning the playoffs. So at that point, does it really matter? I mean, does it matter if you're losing a game 17-16 versus 30-3? I mean, if you have to rely on your backup quarterback, you're probably not going to win. And if you're not going to win, I'd say it really doesn't matter. So why not get the players, the picks, or whatever you can for him?
I would agree with you to an extent. And, I think Sheldon Richardson, talented guy, but there's two concerns for me. If the trade option was Sheldon Richardson for A.J. McCarron or whatever that would look like, Sheldon Richardson has played in a 3-4 defense. And if there's one thing the Bengals have made a really bad habit of, and I guess this could go back to what they should give up for Lent, is grabbing scheme play guys that don't fit their scheme. Talented guys, but they don't fit their scheme. And they've done that in years past. And I don't know that Sheldon Richardson, a 3-4 defensive end, would be a super effective player in the Bengals. You can call it a nickel front, which is mostly what it is. But it's usually a 4-man front. So that's one thing. And then you got to look at now the state of the offensive line after such a poor year protecting the passer last year. They're in way worse shape this year. And how long is Andy Dalton going to stay upright? I mean, I don't say that as any kind of I wish injury on him or anything, but I think I'm a little legitimately scared for his well-being based on losing their two best linemen and not really having a plan in place on it. So in that respect, you mentioned the backup quarterback may not be able to get them to the playoffs or something like that. Yes, but we did see A.J. McCarron have some moments in the 5 games he played in, including the playoffs a couple of years ago. So I don't know. I don't know. But I do agree with you. They need to get something for him if they're open for him. And maybe now, with losses of great players and things like that, maybe now they're a little more open to trade talks, or will be more open to trade talks than they will have been previously to losing some of these good guys. One other – go ahead.
Real quick, you mentioned scheme. Just something I want to throw out, just totally out of nowhere. But as far as Richardson being a 3-4 defensive end, they actually seem to have the personnel that they could switch to that. If you figure Billings could be your big plugging nose tackle, Dunlap kind of has the size of a defensive end with his height and size. Marcus Hunt is more of a 3-4 defensive end also. Richardson. So you've got Dunlap, Richardson, and I know Hunt's a backup, but still you have them. The one thing you're missing is the edge rusher. So let's say, they go after Yokiero Taco Charlton or someone in the first or second round. You've got your edge rusher. You seem to have the guys up front. I know, okay, then the question is, what do you do with Atkins? And, okay, I'm thinking this through as I'm spouting it. So,
well, at least they could vary. At least they could vary looks. At least they could vary the looks. And that's, that makes sense to me. Obviously, you don't want Atkins off the field a lot, but again, Atkins is now a guy that's approaching 30. He had a torn knee ligament a couple of years ago, and he's still a 3-down player, but at some point you got to start limiting these guys snaps when they're 29, 30 years old instead of 26, 27 years old, and they kind of had a little more gas in the tank to be able to be on the field a bit more. So I get what you're saying there. And there's nothing wrong with showing some diversive looks up front. It's just a matter of them executing that well. And, Sheldon Richardson, that's a big name that they could get on defense. And, the Bengals weren't as strong on defense either last year, whether it was stopping the run or rushing the passer. So, defensive line should help in the form of Billings for sure. And then Richardson. So another one we had from Ryan Jones. I think it was asked to us at least, will Jabril Peppers be a sleeper pick? Now, I'm sure you absolutely, being an Ohio State guy, Scott, I'm sure you absolutely love Jabril Peppers. To me, a very interesting player. And if you did not, since you gave it up for Lent, Jabril Peppers worked out with linebackers and he worked out with defensive backs. Now he's listed as a linebacker, and being as such, he performed very well in the 40-yard dash, the vertical jump, and the broad jump, and all of that. And he ran a 4.46 40, which is obviously fast for a linebacker and still pretty fast for defensive backs. So, might he be a sleeper pick at 9? Whether it's those two top wide receivers are off the board, whatever kind of plays out, they're not enamored with Reuben Foster anymore because of what happened at the Combine. Might he be in play at number 9, even since they re-signed Drake Kirkpatrick, Adam Jones is still on the roster. They gave extensions to their 2 safeties last year. I don't know. What do you think?
I would seriously hope not, and that's not because of North. But if we were going to go for a defensive back, I would much rather have someone like Jamal Adams from LSU or Malik Hooker from Ohio State, and not just because he's from the Ohio State. But the video I've seen of him, it's interesting. If you look at the mock drafts going back to, let's say, Halloween, Advent, Thanksgiving, a lot of people had Peppers in the top 5. Around Christmas, he started dropping out to like top 10 or 15. Yes, up leading up to the Combine, you rarely saw him in the top 15 picks. And I think as people have kind of gotten more film of him, they've seen some of the flaws, and some of the things you kind of pick up on real easily are he tends to get burned too easily in coverage for a safety. He tends to be too focused on looking in the backfield, can get out of position in coverage, and doesn't seem to be an instinctive cover guy, but seems to be more of a run stopper. And so I could see him maybe in like a Sean Williams kind of role, that, okay, here's a guy who you're using as a kind of that hybrid, kind of what we had with Taylor Mays. He's a guy you can put in coverage if you absolutely have to, but you're using him more against the run. And I'd be very surprised, since they have the 2 safeties, to see them grab him at number 9, only because he seems to be one-dimensional in his game. Now, he can also do returns. And so then the question is, okay, is a guy who can return the ball really well and a guy who is a kind of a one-dimensional run-stopping defensive back, is that worth a top 10 overall pick? My money would be on no, but I'm obviously not Dick Tobin or Mike Brown or Marvin Lewis. I can't make that decision for him. I'd be surprised, but I can't say I'd be disappointed. I can't say I'd be totally surprised. I don't know. Do you think he'd be there? Do you think I'd be an option?
I think if he, and unfortunately, this is kind of just what it is with him. If he had, he's listed at about 215 pounds. If he had, I think he'd be a better speedy linebacker type of guy, or a guy like how the Rams use Mark Barron, where it's kind of a linebacker safety hybrid. And I think, like you said, the Bengals have tried to do that with Taylor Mays. It never really worked out. But having a guy like a perfect example of this was Troy Polamalu later in his career, where they just said, dude, go and just roam the field. It was almost like, just diagnose the play as you see it and fly to the football. And he made a Hall of Fame career out of it. No, I'm not saying Jabril Peppers is Troy Polamalu by any stretch of the imagination, but he could be, especially because he's viewed as a top 10 pick or so in this year's draft. I just think if teams are looking at him as a defensive back, the Bengals do not need him. They do not need that position, and they do not need it at number 9. Maybe they need it, and if they do something with Adam Jones, maybe things change. There was some talk in our chat room also about USC's Adoree Jackson, a really interesting guy, a track guy, and a very productive guy at USC, but too much of a reach at number 9. Maybe he's there end of the first, top of the second, and that would be interesting. But you almost wish for Peppers, to me, that he was a little bulkier and could really be a true linebacker in terms of NFL prototype. I haven't watched a ton of film on him. You've seen probably more of him than I have, but I do think I see kind of that, you know what, like not so much a heady playbook type of guy, but a guy that has immense athleticism, and they just kind of said, go do your thing. And some NFL teams may like that. Some NFL teams might not. It just kind of depends. But that's kind of my take on him. Rangy, can do a lot of things, but I don't know if there's a true solid fit for him at this point.
Yeah, and I think I'm probably old enough. I've been following the NFL draft long enough that I think I'm at the point where I'm pretty well convinced. I've been trying to follow, what are look at the guys who are the prospects. What are they good at, bad at? You look at their videos, you look at their scouting reports, you look at how they do the combine, you look at all the stuff, you look at where they get drafted, you look at how they perform. And I think we probably both are at that age where we've seen, several generations of players kind of come and go over the last 10, 20 some years. That to me, the biggest thing that seems to matter is, are the guys good at football stuff on the field? I don't care how fast you are. I don't care how fast you can jump. I don't care if you're, ripped and you take your shirt off. What I care about is, are you instinctive enough that when you're on the field, you seem to know what you're doing, and you just are. And you kind of mentioned Troy Polamalu, that, you just throw him out there and you watch him. You're like, wow, this guy just, he reads the play, he diagnoses, he knows what to do. And that's one of the things I really like about watching someone like Mike Williams is he's not going to be the 4.3 40 guy, but when the ball's thrown anywhere near him, he just does wide receiver stuff at a very high level. And that's something I just don't see with Peppers. He's athletic. He's obviously, a good athlete. But when it comes to some of those defensive back things, especially, the coverage thing, he's just someone that you don't see him and say, yeah, he seems to get, the run support stuff he's good at, and maybe as a nickel linebacker, something. But yeah, I think top 10 would be a bit.
But yeah, and you don't want to use a number 9 overall pick on a niche player in the NFL. You know what I mean? You need, at this point, especially with their losses in free agency, their poor year last year, the Bengals need impact players both at number 9 and at the top of the second round. I think they need immediate impact players to right the ship and really give the fan base a little bit of a hope of, hey, this isn't a team totally in regression now over the past 2 years. Now, I'm not saying Jabril Peppers can't be that, but I do see what you're saying in the fact that he might be more of a niche guy in the NFL than a guy that is a true 3-down player. But you've seen, like I said, there are guys around the league. Tyrann Mathieu was a guy that's not big for a safety, but has made a ton of plays. The 49ers, when Harbaugh was there, drafted a couple of defensive backs that have been these hybrid corner safety linebackers. And then I said Mark Barron and others with the Rams have been, kind of these guys that have been effective in those roles. But we'll see. One more question, Scott, before we get out of here. We've had a couple of people, including a good friend of the show, Waldo, saying, by the way, what's going to happen to Rex? You had mentioned in an earlier segment that you think he's gone. I think now they'll probably do some things, whether PR moves or whatever, to retain the guys that they want at this point. So I think Rex stays. I just don't know. Like, how are they going to get him on the field? There's Gio's going to get his touches. Jeremy Hill's going to get his touches. That's the one thing I don't know if he actually will stay, because he'll sit there and go, I don't know how much playing time I'm going to get, even though the money might be right.
Yeah, and I think if you're Rex Burkhead, I think I'd be inclined to go, just because, like you said, also there's no offensive line. So if you stay, you've got no one blocking for you, and you're going to be in a 3-headed committee. And I think that's one of the challenges with the Bengals. And I can't say I trust their offensive coordinator enough to figure out how to do that.
That's an understatement.
Just based on last year. And I think that's one of the things you run into is since you don't have a great running back, you have Jeremy Hill, who, despite all the promise after his rookie year, has been very mediocre. You have Gio, and you have, I mean, he could come back and be great, or he could come back and be injured for half, just struggling to get back to 100% and just not do much this year. So, but they're not horrible and they're not great. So it's like, okay, you've got a couple decent guys. You're adding Burkhead in the mix. So you're going to have three guys who are all fairly comparable. And at some point you just, you can only have so many decent guys sharing the space. And so if you're Burkhead, do you want to come back for 7-8 touches a game, even if they pay you as much as another team who might say, hey, we'll give you 15-20? Maybe the Vikings, he was Peterson's probably go on teams that just says, hey, we need a clear number two, or we need a guy who maybe even has a chance to be a number one. Maybe he wants to go somewhere like Dallas where he has a chance to win, be a backup. Maybe he'd go somewhere like the Saints where, because Ingram's always hurt. Who knows where to go? But I think that you'd almost have to give him more than money. And the Bengals, I can't imagine them paying that much for a running back, and especially since they really didn't use him his first 4 years, that all of a sudden they're going to say, hey, have we sat you on the bench for 4 years? But now we really like you.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I like the guy, and the Bengals in the past used their third down backs or their third string backs pretty effectively in the form of Brian Leonard and Dede Dorsey, if you remember that name. I mean, guys were used. Rex really was only used once. Both Gio went down and Hill was banged up at the end of the year. And same thing when he played in the playoffs a couple years. So I don't know. I mean, I'd like to see him stay. It just fills a hole that they don't need in the draft. But if he's just kind of a guy, I don't know. And I'm really curious to see whether he stays with the Bengals or – go ahead.
If they get a trade in place to move on from Hill or something, I don't know who would trade for Hill, but then I could see it happening. Otherwise, I just don't, because one guy I'm thinking of is someone like Bernard Scott or Kenny Watson. They were guys who were backups, never really got a chance unless, everyone and their brother got hurt. Then they would get a decent chance. And I think with Scott, once his rookie year was done, or contract, he was basically gone. And I just think they have too many. They are too loyal to the people they have under contract who are the veterans and have more experience. And in that case, that's Hill and Bernard. So unless those guys are moved or something's done, I would be very surprised to see them pay a guy who right now is their number 3.
Yeah, and Bernard's rehab as well on his knee. That's also a factor, I would think. Good. I don't know if you got anything else on the topic, Scott. Otherwise, I was going to wrap up. Anything else?
As far as football related, no, or not on that question.
Okay. Real quick, obviously, I've said this a couple times in the show. If you want to follow us, subscribe to our content, we're on a number of different platforms: iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube. We're on Cincy Jungle. You can get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI and via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. We love to hear from you. The activity tonight, both in fan questions and aside from us liking the fan questions, we love that you guys interact with each other. There are Bengals fans. There was somebody that said, oh, it's 2:30 my time, and is the show starting yet? So there are fans from literally all over the world and all over the place interacting with each other. And even though they haven't met face to face, it's very cool to see them talking in the YouTube chat and everything. So we are live every show. We are live at Cincy Jungle and on our YouTube channel. So check us out. Scott, I want to make just kind of a special announcement in upcoming shows. Because it's the off season, we haven't had many guests on for interviews. We did quite a few of them during the season, especially with opposing writers of the opposing team the Bengals were going to face that season. But we've lined up a couple of people that should be coming up over the next couple of shows. So former Bengals tight end Nate Lowry is going to be joining the program. We have him scheduled for next week, so we're hopeful that he'll be continuing to join us. He's obviously got some insight on the Bengals, the Patriots, and doing some cool stuff in his life after football. So he is going to join us next week, so stay tuned for that. Joe Goodberry, a draft analyst and a Twitter favorite of many Bengals fans, will be on the program. And probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to line that up. He's agreed to be on the program. And another gentleman, Chris Rolling, who covers the Bengals and the Bears for Bleacher Report, we'll be having him on around free agency draft time as well. So we'll have some other insight aside from our own, and I think that'll be entertaining, especially as we see free agency and the draft kind of unfold. So we will be having more guests coming on for those who were wondering, and I'm pretty stoked to talk to those guys, Scott.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a great opportunity for fan questions too. So it's definitely a good time to get everyone tuned in and get their questions submitted on Twitter and the chat room and whatever. Absolutely.
And we want to encourage that. So, Scott, try and keep your head up with what happened in the first 24 to 48 hours of free agency here. The Bengals will make moves. It just depends on what they are and how splashy they are. I appreciate you being flexible with your schedule and joining me on this Thursday night following free agency's kickoff. And let's hope that next week we have a little bit of happier tone, huh?
Yeah, let's hope the carnage has kind of come to an end, and by then, and if nothing else, at least I can watch my Dayton Flyers play tomorrow.
There you go. They've been doing well, you said, right?
Yeah, they're pretty much, they look to be a lock for the tournament, so now it's just a matter of seeding. So as long as they don't lose anyone over the next week, like the Bengals, they should be in good shape.
Nice.
So hopefully by next time we meet, the Bengals have signed someone new. That would be encouraging.
Yeah.
New roster.
Yeah, that would be a. I don't know if we'd say that's a sign of progress, but that is a step forward after probably like 16 back on the first day of free agency. Anyways, folks, thanks for tuning in. We had a number of different viewers. Appreciate it. For Scott Schulte, I'm Anthony Cosenza. This has been the Orange and Black Insider. Appreciate it. Hoo day.